Hey everybody, we are going to continue on with community ecology, and we're going to start by talking about succession. And succession is going to be the changes in species composition over time. And there are two general stages that we're going to kind of get some more details on. The first is the sear stage, and this is going to be the unstable stage, usually replaced by another community. And then you have the climax stage, which is the stable stage, and this is going to be self-reproducing. And we have two succession types that we also need to discuss. The first is primary succession, and this is when you're building a community from a lifeless area. And so this can happen because of volcanoes, so like volcanic islands start through primary succession, glaciated areas once glaciers recede. You're going to start building new communities if you have road cuts. So like even if you were to walk around, we're in Chicago, and if you have let's say like abandoned parking lots that over time they've been paved over, but you start to see cracks and plants are starting to grow, that is also an example of primary succession because it was a lifeless area. Just a quick comment, the first example of primary succession was worked out on the Indiana Dunes. The stages were open beech, and then you would see the development of beech grasses, and then conifers, then oaks, and then a beech maple forest, which was the climax community. Secondary succession then is where a community has been disturbed and the soil is still mostly intact. So this could be like the cutting down of a forest or after a forest fire. The soil is still there and still intact, and so the succession is going to start from that point on. So there are two causes of succession, autogenic factors and then allogenic factors. So autogenic factors are going to be changes that are introduced by the organisms themselves, so things like toxins or acids. And then allogenic factors would be outside disturbances, so a fire, a flood, or any other natural disaster that could wipe out an area. So we're going to take a look at one specific example, which is prairie succession. We're going to look at a prairie succession in Oklahoma at the different stages, but remember Illinois is a prairie state, and so this happened here as well when there was more prairie around the state. So the four stages are going to be the annual weed stage, triple on grass, bunch grass, and then the climax community, which is the tall grass prairie. So the annual weed stage usually lasts about 2 to 3 years. You see very robust growth, and you tend to see species like sunflower, pigweed, and lamb's quarter. So this is an example of what it could look like. The next stage is going to be the triple on stage. This is going to be about 10 to 50 years long, and it's actually very poor growth, and you're going to see a lot of triple on grass. So now a quick question to think about is, how does a triple on grass replace the more robust annual weeds? And the answer is something called allelopathy. And this is when you have the release of chemical inhibitors into the environment. So an example here would be that the sunflower is autotoxic, but triple on is tolerant and so can grow in that area. Another interesting thing about triple on is that it actually inhibits nitrogen fixing bacteria, and so because of that the nitrogen content in the soil stays low and it sort of stalls out succession because there's not a lot of nitrogen in the soil. Now the next stage is going to be the bunch grass stage. This will last anywhere from 20 to 100 years. Pretty good growth in this stage, and this is where you sorry about that random A right there, but this is where you tend to see species like little bluestem. Now the causes of this, what causes the bunch grass to eventually shade out the triple on is the releasing of the bunch grass does eventually shade out the triple on, and that releases the inhibition of the nitrogen fixers within the soil, and so the soil fertility will then increase once that triple on grass is out, and it allows the next group of species to invade. So again, you can see here, I went back a slide, this is the bunch grass stage. You can see looks a little bit different than that triple on stage. Then finally you have the climax prairie stage. This could last centuries if it's maintained well by fire. You have high growth, so tall grass prairies do get very tall, so like up to 2 meters. You see species like big bluestem, Indiana grass, switchgrass, and you will still have little bluestem as well. And this is a very good example of what that would look like. So if you understand the causes and controlling factors of succession, it's really important to understand that if you know what they are, you can actually manipulate them. The next topic we're going to look at is biogeography. And this is going to be the study of past and present distributions of individual species as well as communities. And one thing that's really important to look at are range limitations. So certain communities or species could have a lack of dispersion. You could see that species fail to survive in new areas, or you can actually study how species or communities actually retract from a former range area. So let's say you have a very large range area, you could look at how that range area shrinks over time. In order to do this, we look at things like fossil evidence, pollen studies, and you can actually do transplant experiments as well by adding individuals into areas where they don't currently live and kind of seeing how they do. Islands are very special cases in biogeography because they actually have to be colonized from other areas. And there's two major factors that we look at when we are studying island species. And those are going to be the island size and then the distance between the island and the mainland. And so if you're looking at these graphs, the y-axis is going to be the rate of immigration or extinction. And then you've got here we've got the number of species on the island, and this is immigration and extinction rates. So as the number of species on an island increases, you can see extinction increases. And as the number of species on an island increases, immigration decreases. Here we're looking at the rate of, again, rate of immigration and extinction and island size, but we're also paying attention to large islands versus a small island, and so it's going to be a little bit different. So on a small island, that extinction rate is going to increase even faster, and you can see the immigration never really gets as high because the island is smaller. With a large island, extinction takes a little bit longer, and immigration is going to be a little bit higher. And now this last one, we're looking at the same things, but now we're taking into account the effect of distance from the mainland. And so extinction is going to be unchanged by this, but one thing to notice is that immigration is going to be higher if the island is closer to the mainland and then lower if it's farther away from the mainland. Here what you are looking at is the number of plant species, and you're looking at the size of the island, so you can see that the number of species increases as the island gets bigger. So now island size is really important. Small islands are only able to hold a certain number of species. They tend to hold fewer species, and the reason for that is you have fewer niches available for species to occupy. Then when you look at the distance from the mainland, you tend to see closer islands have more species. And again, the reason for that is pretty simple. It's just easier for colonization. If the island is closer to the mainland, it's going to be easier for more species to get to the island. Another interesting thing is that islands tend to have high numbers of endemic species. And endemic means that you're going to find species only on that specific island. And the reason for that is adaptive radiation and evolution of new species. So if a species makes it out to the island, there are a lot of niches to exploit. You'll tend to see adaptive radiation, and you'll see evolution occur on those islands. So like a good example would be things like the lizards, things like Darwin's finches. So you tend to see these species only on certain islands because of adaptive radiation and evolution. Alright, so the summary for this chapter, you guys should know the various types of interspecific interactions. You need to know about the competitive exclusion principle and niche concept. You should be able to talk about the species with large impact, so those foundation species, those dominant species, the keystone species. You should also be able to know some examples and causes of succession, and then also you should be able to talk about island communities and how they are shaped. So I would like you guys to answer this question in your own words, and it's just, how do island size and distance from the mainland affect island colonization? So again, in your own words, and please send me a message via the class website summarizing this idea of island biogeography. Thanks, guys.